Everyone for joining us for this week's virtual forum. We're pleased to have many of you with us on Zoom and on Facebook Live this Friday when we are about to dig in a little deeper to our ongoing work in response. IPM Respond is the hashtag we've been using to the novel coronavirus and COVID-19 pandemic. As you all know, the virus around the world continues to spread with increasing virulence, particularly in Brazil. I was on a call regarding what's happening in Brazil with some Franciscan friends and others earlier this week, led by Leonardo Boff, a hero of mine going way back to my work in Rome, and also in India, where day by day it seems like they have the highest number of new recorded cases on record in any one country at any time. We know that many of our Latin American staff and partners are struggling in particular with the reopening. And while COVID is not as well documented in East Africa, and particularly in Kenya, I know from a cousin-in-law who was here with us the past week that the situation in Nairobi continues to be downplayed, and there are many people hospitalized and suffering at home. So part of what we began to do last April, really in May, was to think about more directly how we could share what we were learning together with our partners around the world in response to this unprecedented global pandemic. And Alyssa Bovell, who has been with IPM for a number of years and currently serves from her home in Atlanta, Georgia, where she just completed a master's degree at Emory University. She serves as our Director of Monitoring, Evaluation, and Learning in a part-time capacity. And she's been leading our research related to not only how IPM is responding, but of course, most importantly, the day-to-day reality of our partners and staff and friends in community partners as well, in places throughout the world, but with a particular focus on Central in South America, in the countries that IPM is active there, and in India and Nepal. She's been ably supported in this research by Adela Zayas, our Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean, Aneta Ramos, who works directly with our project partners in that part of the world and is increasingly supporting our work in the other regions, by Mahesh Upadhyaya, by Bindia, who's on the call, Sony in Nepal, and many others. And so I'd like to turn this forum over to Alyssa at this point. She'll be walking us through a PowerPoint presentation, and as typically the case, you may chat into the chat function on the screen if you have a question or if you're having any trouble hearing, and also on Facebook Live that we'll be monitoring so that when Alyssa is done with her presentation, we can address those questions or comments to her as well. So thank you again, all of you, for being here, and particularly good to see former board members and good friends, as well as partners and colleagues on the call today. Alyssa, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Joe. I hope everybody can hear me, and please again note if that's not the case. And I just want to welcome you all and thank you for your attendance and participation in this week's forum. As Joe mentioned, I've been connected with IPM since 2014, and through that time I've been, I was responsible for working on the first International General Assembly. I've done work with project partners, coordinated the Immersion Experience program, and I'm currently working with IPM's regional offices and staff and project partners to focus and strengthen our monitoring, evaluation, and learning efforts. So this week I'm going to give a quick recap of my presentation on May 29th for those who weren't able to attend, to give you a brief overview of what we're attempting to understand in this research process and what has unfolded to date in terms of our findings. But as we speak, I want everyone to note that this process is still currently unfolding. So as I share throughout this discussion, and there are thoughts, questions, or comments, as Joe mentioned, please utilize the chat feature in Zoom, and we'll also leave space for questions and comments at the end of the presentation. So to give a quick recap, what were we trying to do and what were we hoping to understand with this research? We had two sort of we had this main overarching question, and in May I presented on how do we conduct research in COVID-19 in light of a lot of social distance measures, a lot of lockdown measures, et cetera, in the different communities that we worked with. But overall, I would say that we attempted to understand the short and potential long-term impacts of the pandemic in project partner communities served. So I will briefly overview again our research approach and the principles, as well as the findings that have emerged to date as part of the analysis. So we really wanted to center this research process with some grounding questions and to understand, like, what are we doing this for? Who are we doing this for? Who are we engaging to design and implement this research, and how? And finally, who is benefiting from this information collected? There's a lot of spaces where research is collected for the sake of research and it doesn't transition into actionable recommendations. And so we wanted to make sure that from the onset, we had decided that the information that we're gathering is going to be directly informing the work that IPM does in the future, particularly as it relates to responding to unexpected and unanticipated crisis situations. So with that, we developed several research principles, particularly around, making sure that our research was collaborative and participatory, doing research with existing relationships with our project partner communities, understanding that we wanted it to be strengths-based, valuing local expertise, and conducted with, not on, the communities that we served. We also focused on intersectional principles, making sure that the research acknowledges and recognizes different inherent power imbalances, particularly related to gender, but also other different social identities. Other really important principles that we wanted to ensure were informed consent, privacy and confidentiality, making sure that we had appropriate collection and storage methods, and ensuring that information that was disseminated from the research team was kept private and confidential. And then finally, just making sure that in light of COVID, we wanted to take as many precautionary measures as possible. So all of the interviews were conducted via an online feature, whether it was Zoom or a mix of WhatsApp and some other sort of online communication method. And then finally, we just wanted to make sure that we made sure that this was a learning and iterative process. As I mentioned before, this process is currently unfolding, and I'll be sharing some preliminary findings, but this document and these findings will be updated as time goes on and as the situation related to the COVID-19 pandemic and its both current impacts and unanticipated long-term impacts come to light. So all of our research questions were centered on what are the different impacts of COVID-19, both current and potential, on women, men, girls and boys, and other vulnerable demographics? How are our project partners responding to the outbreak? What capacities does IPM have to support project partner responses to the virus outbreak? What gaps exist? And how does IPM consider adapting to post-pandemic realities, and what contingency plans are being considered that are responsive to future risks? So these overarching questions are being responded to in different ways by diverse forms of methodology, by different members of the IPM staff. The research element is tackling primarily the first question around different impacts of COVID-19. And then also a little bit about understanding the different capacities and finally how IPM is going to adapt to post-pandemic realities. Our regional staff have been documenting consistently how project partners are responding to the outbreak and have been leading different efforts to provide mutual aid support to those communities. So in addition to the interview that I will share a little bit more about and the analysis process, we also are going to be undertaking a survey with our regional staff to help devise actionable recommendations for future responses. And also, as I mentioned, our regional staff are tracking project partner funding from the onset of the pandemic to date, and different in-kind gifts as well. So this process, I would say, has been long and ongoing. In addition to our our interviews, which have been very wonderfully led by Anita and Adela and Bindia and Mahesh. I primarily took on the data analysis portion, where I was thematically coding interviews based on the responses that were devised. So I was using a platform called MaxQDA to develop those codes, and that directly informed the themes that emerged. So we have done interviews with project coordinators and community members in El Salvador, Nicaragua, Colombia, the Dominican Republic, and India. We are almost done. I believe, if Anita could confirm, I believe we have one more interview in Nicaragua, and then we are complete with all of our interviews in Latin America, and the interview process is currently ongoing in India. And so these interviews have taken place over the course of several months since the pandemic started. I believe I would say April, if I'm not mistaken. And therefore, the different responses from the participants addressed various experiences of the impacts of pandemic measures and the crisis across time. So I think that's really important to note that the responses I noticed, particularly in Latin America, shifted over time, specifically as we were talking about the impacts of lockdown measures, et cetera. And so, as I mentioned, the analysis has been built up progressively, and this has involved both primary data collection through interviews, but also secondary data analysis to explore the potential vulnerabilities, gender dimensions of risk, and community capabilities to inform, again, overarching IPM's future responses to crisis situations. The most prominent themes that have emerged to date have included loss of income in business as it relates to project partner income generating opportunities, challenges related to food and nutrition security, very specific and interrelated challenges affecting children and youth, shifts and changes in relationship dynamics, not only at the household level, but at the community level, community efforts that have centered around solidarity and collective care. And then finally, I'm gonna delve into some of the very specific gendered implications of the COVID-19 pandemic. The first one that I'll start with, loss of income and business. COVID-19, it's been clear, I think, in all of the communities that we not only serve, but are currently residing in, that it's laid bare existing vulnerabilities around economic inequities, around poverty, across different, and that has impacted various demographics. So strict quarantine measures to protect from the virus have also taken its toll on informal economies in many of the Latin American, Caribbean, and South Asian communities that we are connected with. And so many respondents discussed a reduction in project initiatives. For those projects that are specifically engaging in income generating activities, which is quite a few of them, they have taken a particular hit. At the household level, many respondents noted that there has been challenges around lack of transportation, reduced job opportunities, et cetera, that have directly connected to the loss of household income and have cascaded a variety of other challenges that I'll discuss shortly. So as we all know, different measures to contain the spread of the virus include different curfews, suspension of transportation, impacting the ability to travel to work, impacting the closing of schools, et cetera. And so all of that results into really challenging economic impacts that have provided diverse challenges around the ability for families to meet their basic needs, including that of providing sufficient and adequate food and nutrition for their families. So food, nutrition, security, I would just say briefly, it's defined as the ability to, the availability and access to food and the intake of foods that provide essential and needed nutrients. So in many places that IPM works, traditionally, women are responsible for the preparation of foods, yet have some of the most significant malnutrition rates. As a result of the pandemic, families are forced to adopt negative coping mechanisms, such as reduced food purchases, reduced portion sizes, not purchasing food to be able to afford protective equipment and sanitation supplies, borrowing money, loss of savings, rationing of supplies, inability to pay for household expenses and bills. And so this loss of household income has directly impacted food and nutrition security as respondents expressed concern about feeding their families and indicated that they perhaps may begin to rely on subsistence farming to supplement the need for food items. This also has significant impacts for the individuals and communities that produce food. In India, for example, there was a note that there's been an increase in the prices of vegetables and other crops that directly results to the losses that farmers experience. Next, I'm going to transition into challenges particularly affecting children and youth. I'm going to start with a quote that was said by a respondent in Latin America. There's been a change regarding intellectual, physical, and emotional aspects affecting children. Learners tend to identify their spaces, and school is one of them. Non-social interactions affect their learning process because online and physical classrooms are not the same. There's been a lack of control this year since children interact and identify themselves in a physical space. So this really affects in their whole learning development. As we know, many countries suspended in-school learning countrywide in response to suggested physical and social distancing measures in order to mitigate the person-to-person transmission of the virus. And numerous respondents indicated that the pandemic has significantly impacted educational opportunities for children and youth. Challenges that also directly affect schooling that existed pre-COVID crisis, but are now exacerbated, include limited access to internet, computers, or other necessary supplies, and inadequate support to follow lesson plans or complete homework. There are also concerns that reduced socialization, organized activities, and confinement at home are impacting the psychosocial development of children. In India, for example, it was noted that the result of children missing or experiencing limited access to the protective spaces and systems that school provides and education provides has resulted in an increase in child labor. For example, girls are responsible for household work, boys are responsible for work outside of the home. Care responsibilities have increased where also they're expected to take care of younger siblings. And there's a concern that this will result in significant dropout rates and therefore additional compounding impacts on their development and opportunities into adolescence and adulthood. The next theme that I'm going to discuss, changes in relationship dynamics, this is probably one of the most predominant themes. It was noted that there was a increased fear and distrust amongst community members, amongst those particularly just the unknown of who has the virus and who doesn't, given the ability of asymptomatic individuals to spread the virus. Many respondents also expressed that as a result of the pandemic, they were unable to see various family members, including elderly. Sorry, can everybody still hear me?
Yes, we can. I'm able to.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Great. Many respondents also expressed that as a result of the pandemic, they're unable to see family members, including the elderly who have underlying health conditions and require care. But despite physical distance and quarantine measures, the pandemic also continues to bring individuals within a household together. So some respondents indicated that as a result of the pandemic and mandatory quarantine orders, it allowed for more significant time to spend with family. The next and probably one of the most prominent themes, I would say, was solidarity and collective care. This theme has created various women in the community for mutual aid efforts. Many respondents discussed the community being more united during the pandemic, despite being physically distant. And so these efforts are led some of these efforts are led in collaboration with IPM Project Partners, and collective care support has included, for example, the delivery of food aid packages, managing virtual connections, and emotional support. And so many communities have organized around prevention activities to enhance sanitation measures and provide cleaning supplies and protective equipment to individual families and households. And there are also efforts to spread awareness around the risks of the virus, given limited access in some locations to health information. And that has included passing out informational flyers and guidance on social distancing to minimize contagion. And so two quotes that I thought were really prominent. One was, notice that in the community, people are more united. I did not know that should say all the names of the neighbors, and now we have related much more. For example, if I make bread, I share it with the neighbors, and so do they. And then another quote, we are receiving families in need with open doors. I told families that if they knew of someone in need, please let them know about this program. 9 new people have come. What we are going to do is increase the number of people we receive here. And I think it's really important just to note that that despite the fear and distrust that I had mentioned, there are also really strong elements of that mutual care that individuals and communities are giving one another. I'm going to transition directly into the gendered implications of COVID-19. This was really important. If everyone could mute themselves, I'm hearing an echo. This was really important. This is a really important element of the analysis because gender is not just about differences, but it defines specifically what it is, for example, to mean a man or a woman, girl or a boy in any context, and therefore it carries specific roles, statuses, expectations within households and communities. And so the impact of health crises are not gender neutral and have different implications across genders. So people face different risks based on their age, their gender, and intersects with other forms of diversity, which can exacerbate different relations at the community and household level, including caste, race, sexual orientation, ethnicity, those living with disabilities, etc. And it impacts directly how people prepare for, respond, and recover from the impacts of a crisis. And so recognizing these differences was really essential into this process because we want to bring different perspectives and experiences in order to directly relate to the recommendations that we build and the solutions that we're hoping to try and develop. And so through this assessment, there were several gendered themes that emerged specifically on gendered roles and responsibilities at the household and community level, unpaid care work, access to household resources, and concern and protections concerned specifically on gender-based violence. And so I think we've noticed that, there are very specific vulnerabilities that have existed with the elderly, people living with disabilities, those with who are socially marginalized and therefore have limited access to, for example, health systems. And all of that has directly informed some of the findings that have emerged. So the first one that I'm going to discuss, caregiving responsibilities and unpaid care work. So this refers to the burden of care within households that are often disproportionately impacting women and girls. It's often referred to as a care economy, and this type of work includes the reproduction of everyday life at the household level, including cooking, raising children, caring for the sick, and caring for elderly. As a result of social and cultural norms concerning women's household and caregiving realities, COVID-19 is the risk of entrenching those inequitable gender norms that contribute to women holding roles and expectations within their household. For example, mentioned in India, health services have stalled, which can increase the risk of women contracting the virus as they are often the primary caregivers of family members who are sick and have limited access to formal health services. And given the suspension of in-schooling in many parts of the world, that sorry. Can you? I'm sorry, everyone. Hold on. I'm not sure where I cut off, Ilza.
It was just a second, so just feel free to continue where you were. Mm-hmm.
Great. And so given the suspension of in-school learning in many countries, many women are forced to assume the responsibility of continuing the education of their children. And according to the respondents, these additional responsibilities have generated stress, as women are often unable to pursue income-generating opportunities, making them more financially and socially vulnerable. One specific quote that I want to share is from Latin America. Consider that women and children are the most vulnerable because there are many women who are dedicated to raising poultry, but people outside are no longer purchasing this because they are afraid an animal could be infected by COVID-19. Women have problems with this, and other women who had small businesses can no longer work. Also in homes where there's no gender awareness, women work even more. At least when children went to schools, they were given lunches there, and now, since they are all home, there is more work for women. The next gender implication that I'm going to specifically talk about is protection concerns. Secondary analysis indicates that the pandemic isolation and quarantine measures have exacerbated vulnerable situations for women and children in homes, and that rates of gender-based violence across the globe have increased. I want to specifically note that none of our interview questions posed any inquiries around direct experiences of violence. Yet there were respondents who noted an increase in violence within their communities. So there was discussions around increasing tensions in the household, which have resulted in rising cases of, for example, intimate partner violence and violence against children, as well as psychological violence at the household level. There is also a significant risk as lockdown measures have resulted in the reduction of available gender-based violence prevention and response services, as well as essential sexual and reproductive health services. So for example, and this poses really, really significant risks because an increase, for example, in care responsibilities and unpaid care work gives women limited time and privacy to disclose cases of violence and therefore seek essential services and have access to safe spaces. And as I mentioned before, we did not pose any direct question regarding situation of violence or perceived violence, yet in India and Nicaragua as well, there were discussions that women are experiencing increasing situations of abuse. And then I would say some of the additional themes that have emerged are also tied in directly to everything that I've discussed so far, include stress and mental health challenges. Some of the respondents noted this directly, would call it out as stress and mental health, particularly that of children. And some noted it as fear and just increased tension. There's also themes that had discussed reduced access to public services, including transportation, again, implicating the ability of individuals and families to work. There was also notes of minimal government support as a result of COVID-19 in some communities in Latin America. They said that the local government gave them one food package and then they hadn't heard anything again. There are also notes in El Salvador, or in India and Colombia, I believe, around local government corruption and challenges associated with that. And finally, another, so relevant, technology and communication challenges have also been a primary theme that have been discussed. And so I also want to note that, as I mentioned before, this document will be updated as the situation evolves and new information becomes available. And in terms of where we're going with this and what's next, give you an overview of our process so far. We had initiated this process sort of at a staged level in the different regions. So Latin America had started conducting interviews first and are currently at wrapping up that process. And so I would say that they are probably a little bit almost at the end of step 3. And in India and South Asia, we are currently continuing to conduct interviews and also are going through that translation, transcription, and analysis process. Following the collection of all of our surveys, as I mentioned before, we really want this information to be actionable. And so we will be connecting with our IPM's regional staff to develop those actionable recommendations. And we will be devising an overall final report with additional secondary analysis around the situation and how it's evolved in each of the communities that we're conducting interviews in. And that will also be translated and then disseminated amongst the different IPM constituencies. And so we also really wanted to ensure that the information that we gathered and the recommendations that we were developing were then being directly fed back to the communities that we served, and so they understand that it wasn't just a process for us to collect information. We weren't just using this for our own gain or benefit. We really want this to directly impact how you are experiencing and responding to the situation. And then I would say, as I mentioned, these overall, all this information will then be used to sort of strengthen IPM's capacity to continue to address the different needs of the most vulnerable and communities served, and leverage those existing capacities that we see are emerging, for example, around solidarity and collective care, to inform future work. And that's everything I have to present so far. I want to open it up for questions, but I also, comments as well. I would love to hear just general thoughts about this process, any ideas that individuals have of things that we may not have explored to this point, and how we might move forward. So I'm going to stop sharing now, if I can, and turn my video back on. Oh, I see a question in the chat. Are there plans to share outside of IPM social services presentations to other groups so important? That is a great question. We haven't explored that directly. I believe that that's something that we could do, but as I mentioned, and as Anita, Mahesh, Adela, and I have discussed, one of our first priorities is to making sure that the information is shared directly back with IPM Project Partners.
Thank you again, Alyssa. And
Joe, you're a little techno. Joe, we're really having trouble hearing.
I just wanted to commend again Alyssa. Can you hear me now?
Yes, better.
Yes.
Can you? Okay. Please go ahead then.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I don't think we caught any of what you said.
Well,
so I don't know if there's a question there. Okay.
I did make out Joe saying commend you, so
better. It's like a half an hour.
I definitely would want to reinforce that. We're just very grateful, Alyssa, for all the work and effort that you put into this process. And I know you had a wonderful team working with you, with Anita's support, Adela's support, our regional staff. So it's just, for me, I've had the privilege of seeing in more detail some of Alyssa's report information. And for me, what stood out the most was some of the quotes, because there's numerous quotes that have been compiled from our partners that really show the impact of the solidarity that they feel through IPM support, and the impact of how together we try to constantly support their efforts. So this is incredibly valuable, and as Alyssa and Joe initially said, we hope to use this to continue to strategically and effectively drive IPM's operational support and programmatic support. So thank you, Alyssa.
Yeah, thank you. I would also just say, I'll share just a little bit very briefly about the recommendations that we've developed so far. So one of them included making sure that any information that we collect in the future and ongoing that we continue to collect now is disaggregated, particularly by age and by sex at minimum. So in order to understand the impacts across different, as I mentioned, different social identities, this means that we, and in order to make sure that we have socially inclusive response activities, we need to recognize that including at-risk and marginalized populations in data collection is really important. So that disaggregated information is going to be essential. We also recognize that given some of the protection concerns that have evolved, it's going to be really important that we explore opportunities around, awareness and sensitization, messaging, particularly around gender inequality, given that the impact of COVID runs the risk of further entrenching some of those harmful gender norms. We have to consider that, in our work with primarily women, children, and youth, what opportunities do we have to conduct culturally appropriate and sensitive messaging around shared responsibility, for example, at the household level. And then finally, I think one of the priorities that we're going to try and move forward with is undergoing protection sort of response training for all IPM project staff. That's going to be led by local institutions and leaders who are doing this work on such issues, as IPM has not traditionally done so, because in our work in these communities and primarily with women and children and youth, we have to, at minimum, be able to provide safe and ethical referrals to survivors of these situations.
Oh, Larry, you need to unmute yourself.
Hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I wonder if it's possible to contribute directly to the findings of this project. I'm just saying, if you lump it, what do you call what we're doing here? Is it research or all of this sort of thing? Or can we just put it in, we're interested in contributing toward the findings and conclusions, and let the board or others direct the dollars where they're needed most, staff or otherwise?
That's not a question I can answer, unfortunately. And Joe, it looks like Joe is paused.
If Joe's paused, I can hopefully answer. Larry, certainly any kind.
Can I be heard now, or am I?
Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Joe. Go ahead, Joe.
Can you hear me or no?
Yes.
Oh, good. Finally, I don't know what this has all been about. Larry, that's an excellent question. And the project that Alyssa is coordinating goes by the acronym MEAL, M-E-A-L, which is Monitoring, Evaluation, Assessment, and Learning. And I had not heard of that either until she went off to Emory to get her master's degree. But it's basically a meal, if you will, process with IPM. And I suppose folks could donate directly to that, but maybe the easiest thing to do is to donate towards the ongoing match challenge we have related to IPM's response to COVID-19 and the pandemic. And the funding that we're receiving for that not only supports our partners directly through donations of,
little choppy again, Joe.
Material supplies and also technical assistance and training, etc. But frankly, in this economic climate and with the loss related to COVID, there are donors who are directly supporting some of the folks that are on the call. I'm very proud, though I'm not concerned, because it's still very difficult. But at this point, IPM has not had to let anyone go or lay anyone off. We had shared sacrifice amongst the staff so that everyone could stay on board. And in fact, have recently, as of October 1st, expanded the time that Aneta and Vicky are able to work with us because of the real well, both the wonderful nature of their work and the real importance of their work for our mission, and particularly this project and how we'll respond going forward. There may be more direct things that people can speak to around financial needs, whether it's Mahesh, Adela, Alyssa, Ilsa, whoever. But I guess I would direct, if people are interested in supporting the program, to just designate it for the, the match campaign. And you can certainly let us know that you'd like it to go to support the research, to support the regional staff, or to support, as you always can, a partner directly.
Right. Thank you, Joe. That's very helpful. I was totally unaware of the match campaign. So I now know about it and I can go ahead.
Okay, I was going to send a chat, but I'm just going to jump in. The work that I saw this morning is outstanding and it is groundbreaking in my estimation. I know that IPM comes first as far as where we're going with the pandemic and our partners, but has there been any thought to engaging and possibly getting additional fund from other groups by sharing this particular report? I found it fascinating, and I am just torn apart by what I'm hearing, what I'm seeing, and I'm looking for other opportunities to further what we're doing. But not only that, but what we are doing has impact to so many others throughout the world. And I know that you're just at the end stages of it, but is there any thought of doing something like that?
Alyssa, would you like to do that, or would you like me to, or both?
Sorry, I just realized I was muted. I think we both can probably respond to that. There have been discussions, and I've had additional thoughts around different ways to use this information to sort of leverage our network building opportunities, but more specifically at the country level, not necessarily in terms of research mobilization. And so that is definitely something that I think is worth exploring, because it would be nice. One of my goals is to clean up, is to finalize and clean up the findings document and post it on our website, so it's available to the public. But I think that I really do believe that there are opportunities to strengthen some of the work that we're doing, particularly around some of those gender and protection concerns that I'd mentioned before. Joe, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I would just add that there's a narrative report that Alyssa, with the support of all the folks she mentioned earlier, has put together. It's wonderful. It includes much of what you saw in the PowerPoint, but some other information, quotes, recommendations, obviously, that couldn't be captured in this brief time today. But it is our hope, and she and I have discussed that there are both a new national funder that's supporting IPM with a major foundation personally, but we're hoping that there might be other connections that she can leverage or hope connect for us. But also in Cleveland, many of you will remember that when we moved to Cleveland, part of the argument we made of the benefit of having an organization like IPM there is what could be learned in sort of the traditional IPM two-way street model of this assumption that we're going to help people abroad rather than we have anything to learn from them. And in the early days, some of you on the call will remember we had quite a bit of conversation about Bosnian handicrafts in particular, a partner we were supporting at that point, and what they might be able to, how they might be able to share their experience with women's groups in Cleveland, particularly at the Fatima Family Center that we had a strong connection with in the Huff community. It's our hope that the kind of information that Alyssa has just highlighted, particularly around gender-based violence, would also be useful to organizations across the United States. I know that the Domestic Violence Center Next Step, where I live, has been seeing similar trends, very worrisome trends. And I know that's the case in Cleveland through friends who are involved with an LGBTQ center there. A friend of ours who actually traveled with us to Nicaragua just presented at a forum in Cleveland on the impact of COVID on particularly the lesbian community in Cleveland, but also with the Rape Crisis Center in Cleveland. There's been quite a bit of conversation about just the horrific, I don't know if downstream is the right way to put it, but ramifications of the pandemic and people's loss of work, people being trapped at home with abusers, loss of income, increased addiction, you name it. And there's probably some of you on the call that know, certainly more about this, Carol, that there's a lot that could be shared and hopefully opening some doors as well.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And our Optimist Club here in Niles just celebrated its 50th anniversary yesterday. I will be sending a gift to IPM on their behalf.
Thank you, Larry.
You bet.
Jane just posted a chat. I was going to sort of put her on the spot, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to do it because she's got incredible expertise and experience. She's thanking IPM and Alyssa for the presentation, this important work and analysis during this difficult time. Your impressions coincide a lot with what we are hearing from partner churches and programs and relationship of global ministries, which again is the global work of the Disciples of Christ and United Church of Christ. A nice and serious reality check, and wishing best wishes to everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Jane. Do any of the regional staff who are on the call have anything they'd like to add? A number of you, I can see you're muted or we don't see your video, but I can see Bindia and Mahesh nodding, and I know that Anita, Vicky, and Adela are on the call. Is there anything any of you would like to add before we wind down today?
Good morning, everyone. Well, I think that this process has been really difficult, but very, at the same time, like a great opportunity for us to connect better with our project partners and to accompany them in this difficult situation. So I think more than the we have a certain analysis here, but also the connections are stronger with all of them.
Thank you, Anita. Thank you for all your hard work on this. You've been a wonderful addition to the team this last year, and I know that Alyssa in particular and I have really appreciated all your hard work in supporting this project.
It's a pleasure for me too.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something to it. And first of all, Alyssa, thank you so much for capturing so well what we've been trying to say for the last couple of months. It's not easy to translate short narratives and experiences into a theoretical framework. So it is wonderful to see all of it in that framework. Secondly, I think more and more data is coming up, and I don't want to sort of forestall it. I just spoke to Sony today, and it turns out that Nepal has had one of the highest suicide cases during the COVID, and that was quite a shocker for us. More than 20,000 suicides. People have committed suicide in Nepal. For a small country like that, it's an indication of how severe the impact has been on many people, and it's not easy to come out and say that we are having a bad time, we don't have money, we don't have jobs, we don't have employment. So I think this particular study is going to sensitize more and more people to aspects of COVID impact, which are heard about sometimes, but not noticed at close quarters. And I think a few individual testimonies or case studies that you had been mentioning earlier would help us understand the situation much better on the ground, how severe the impact has been, how severe it has been. So that was just a comment from today's conversation with Sony, and thank you once again for capturing our research so well. Thanks.
Thank you, Mahesh. It's a powerful and almost hard to fathom the impact that this is having on people in the communities, like you've mentioned, from what you and I have both heard from Sony and Fumati and others. Nepal is just one example, and Nepal is obviously dear to many of our hearts on this call. Many people have visited Nepal with IPM over the years and doing remarkable work there in such desperate times. Alyssa, I don't want to steal your thunder anymore here.
Joe, I want to add something.
Yes, please, Bindia.
Hello, am I
Yes.
audible?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to say that during the research, we've come across many heart-touching stories. We have been doing a research on certain questions, but at the same time, we got to know some of the stories. Like we were interviewing one fellow from Rajasthan, is from India, Shahadat, I guess. And me and Maheshwar was doing the interview, and at that time, that fellow personally went there for 3 months to stay with those people, leaving his home behind. So by that time, I realized that social work is not just about, speaking and preaching. You have to do work with them and stand by their side when they actually need you. So that was from my side. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bindia, Anita, and Mahesh. I think I focus so much on the analysis and the process, but I think it also is really, really essential to highlight and note the ways in which this research could not be done without the relationships that were existing amongst our regional staff and project partner communities, and particular coordinators, because you're not going to be able to get that, or to build that connection and also get such personal information and understand those really challenging impacts without a relationship focused process. And so without them, we couldn't have done any of this. Are there any final questions maybe before we close out?
May I give tribute to Emory University, where my granddaughter receives her master's in nursing this June.
Oh, that's amazing. Congratulations. Yeah, Emory's a great school. I loved it.
Yeah, we won't comment on Georgia, but Emory and Atlanta, we're pretty happy with. Well, everyone, thank you. In the interest of time, again, I want to thank Alyssa for putting together this really insightful and helpful presentation for all of us. As I mentioned, the research she's doing will certainly be made available to all of you and the public writ large. We want to also commend our colleagues in India, Nepal, and El Salvador in particular for all of their hard work in supporting Alyssa in this research project, as Larry asked. So it gives me an opportunity to say once again, you can donate directly to IPM's response to COVID-19. And we're just short of our $150,000 goals. So every little bit will help put us over on that before the year end. It would be nice to be able to announce we've reached our goal at the end of the year, and as we push for year-end donations. But I do again want to thank everyone for taking the time to be a participant in this week's virtual forum. There are a number of folks who have asked to have the report sent directly to them, and I'll be following up with Alyssa on that. And we also have a narrative report that will be made available soon, and that we'll be discussing at our upcoming board meeting later this autumn. Again, IPM is really pleased to be able to gather everyone on Facebook and Zoom each Friday at 11 for these virtual forums. We'll continue next week, and we'll be announcing a new monthly Spanish, able to hear more directly again from our partners in that part of the world. So thank you all again for being here. I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and may the peace that passes all understanding be with you today and throughout the coming days. Take
Well
care.
done. God bless.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
everyone.
everyone.